Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Your English podcast, the best way to improve your English. Today, we're going to take a really close look at something that I know frustrates quite a few English learners. Maybe you've felt this yourself. It's that feeling like you can understand a fair bit of English, right? You listen to stuff, watch things, you follow along okay.
Yeah, you get the general idea.
Exactly. But then when it's your turn to actually speak, it just feels like there's this, this huge wall. The words, they just don't seem to come out right or smoothly.
Oh, absolutely. That's such a common feeling, really widespread.
Yeah.
And it's something that even, quite advanced learners can struggle with.
Right.
You can feel pretty confident understanding, but then speaking feels like a completely different challenge.
It really does.
So today, we really want to dig into why that happens. And maybe more importantly, what you can actually do about it. How to bridge that gap.
Yes, exactly. So think of this as our mission for this deep dive, if you like. We're going to try and unpack the main reasons for this gap between understanding and speaking. We'll look at how your brain is kind of processing language differently when you're just listening versus when you're trying to actually produce it.
And the big goal really is to give you some practical, actionable things you can try, strategies you can start using, maybe even today, to feel a bit more confident, a bit more fluent when you speak English.
Okay, sounds good. So where do we start? What's the kind of fundamental thing we need to grasp here?
Okay, well, let's get into the nuts and bolts. The first thing that's really crucial to understand is this fundamental difference in how our brains work with what we call passive versus active language skills.
Passive and active skills. Right. So passive skills, that's listening and reading, stuff where you're taking information in.
Exactly. You're being exposed to English, and your brain is doing the work of decoding it, figuring out the meaning. Just listening to us talk right now, that's your passive listening skill at work.
Makes sense.
And if you do that consistently, lots of exposure, your brain starts recognizing patterns, words, phrases, how sentences fit together. You build up this kind of internal library of English.
Like absorbing it, almost.
Yeah, absorbing is a good word for it. You get a feel for the grammar, often without even, consciously studying the rules.
Okay, so that's the passive side. But then there are the active skills, speaking and writing. And this is where it often feels, much harder, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because here, you're not just receiving information. You actually have to produce the language yourself.
Right. You have to pull the words out from somewhere.
Exactly. You need to actively remember the words, recall the grammar structures, figure out how to put them together in a way that actually makes sense and conveys what you want to say. It's a much more demanding process.
It really feels like it. You used an analogy before we started about cooking.
Oh, yeah. It's a bit like, you might be able to look at a complicated dish and recognize all the different ingredients in it. That's got rosemary and garlic and...
Right. You know what's in it.
But actually cooking that dish yourself, putting all those ingredients together in the right way at the right time, that takes a completely different set of skills. It requires practice.
That's a really good way to put it. Knowing the ingredients isn't the same as being the chef.
Precisely. And one key idea here, something researchers talk about, is that speaking especially is like training muscles.
Training muscles, language muscles.
Kind of. It's not just about knowing the words in your head. It's also about the physical act, your mouth, your tongue, your vocal cords, and the cognitive coordination needed to actually say them clearly and correctly.
Okay, so it's coordination, brain and mouth working together.
Yes, exactly. And just like any physical skill, whether it's playing tennis or playing the guitar, that coordination gets better and smoother with, practice. Consistent practice.
Okay, so that begins to explain why understanding feels easier than speaking. One is receiving, the other is producing and coordinating. Makes sense.
So what's a really common, mental block that people hit when they try to make that jump? Oh, a very, very common one is something we often call the translation in your head problem.
Ah, yes. The internal translator.
Exactly. So what happens is when you want to say something in English, your first instinct might be to think of it in your native language.
Mm-hmm.
And then almost automatically, you start trying to translate that thought, word by word, directly into English.
Oh, I definitely used to do that all the time. My brain felt like it was constantly running this translation software in the background. I could follow what people were saying usually,
Right.
but replying, it was this slow, painful process. Find the word, find the next word, try to put them in English order.
Mm. And the big challenge with that word-for-word approach is, well, languages just don't work like that, do they? They don't map onto each other perfectly.
No, not at all. Different structures, different ways of saying things.
You might end up with a sentence in English that's maybe technically okay grammatically, but it just sounds weird, unnatural, or it doesn't quite capture the meaning you intended.
Yeah, it loses something in translation, literally. Nina, I know you've worked with loads of learners. Is this something you see a lot? This kind of imbalance, good understanding, but real difficulty speaking spontaneously?
Oh, absolutely, Alex. It's a pattern I've seen countless times. Students can have a really solid grasp of grammar rules, a great vocabulary when you test them on paper.
Right, they score well on tests.
Exactly. But then ask them to just chat, have a spontaneous conversation. They often become really hesitant. You can almost see them mentally translating each word before they say it.
Yeah, that mental calculation.
In that process, it creates delays, it breaks the natural flow of conversation, and it just makes it really hard for them to feel comfortable and confident participating.
So that constant back and forth translating slows things down and can make you sound a bit unnatural. Okay. What's another big reason why understanding doesn't just automatically lead to fluent speaking?
Well, honestly, it often comes down to something quite simple. A lack of consistent speaking practice.
Just not doing it enough.
Pretty much. We talked about speaking being an active skill, needing that muscle training.
Yeah.
You could spend hours reading articles or listening to podcasts like this one, and those are great for your comprehension, absolutely.
Yeah, they build understanding.
But if you're not actually speaking regularly, then those specific speaking muscles, both the mental and physical ones, they just aren't getting the workout they need to get stronger and more efficient.
That makes total sense. It's like, well, any skill, really. You could read every book on swimming, watch hours of videos of Olympic swimmers, but until you actually get in the water and start trying to swim, you're not going to learn how to do it.
Exactly that. And often there are psychological reasons why people avoid speaking practice.
Yeah.
Self-doubt is huge.
Oh, yeah.
People worry about making mistakes. They worry about sounding silly or that people won't understand.
That fear of messing up, I think anyone learning a language knows that feeling, wanting everything to be perfect before you even try.
And it's so limiting. That fear often stops you from putting yourself in situations where you could practice.
Yeah.
But the catch-22, the paradox, is that you only really get fluent and confident by making those mistakes.
Right. You have to make them to learn from them.
You learn from them, you adjust, you try again. It's just a fundamental part of the process. You can't skip it.
So, okay, more speaking practice is crucial, but I get why finding opportunities or just pushing yourself to do it can feel intimidating for people. What kind of, regular exercise or activities can people actually do to get that practice in?
Well, this brings us back to that muscle training idea. And a really helpful analogy is thinking about it like a gym workout.
Okay, the gym analogy. I like this. So, how is learning to speak English like going to the gym?
Well, think about it. When you go to the gym regularly, you build physical strength, stamina, endurance, right? The same way consistently practicing speaking English is like a workout for your language abilities. Every time you consciously speak, you're strengthening your brain's ability to quickly find the right words.
To put sentences together correctly.
And to actually say the words clearly, the pronunciation part.
And just like with the gym, it's those regular training sessions, the speaking practice, that lead to real improvements over time. You wouldn't expect to suddenly lift a huge weight if you never trained.
Exactly. Or run a marathon without ever jogging.
Yeah.
You can't expect to suddenly speak fluent, confident English if you aren't regularly actively practicing the act of speaking.
Makes sense. You have to put in the reps.
You do. Think about repeating exercises at the gym to target specific muscles. The more you do bicep curls correctly, the stronger your biceps get. Right. It's similar with language. The more you practice forming English sentences, actively retrieving vocabulary, using grammar structures, the easier and more automatic that whole process becomes for your brain.
I can definitely relate that to my own experience. When I first really forced myself to speak more, even simple things felt awkward. Ordering coffee, asking for directions.
It can feel nerve-wracking.
Totally. But the more I just did it, the less scary it became and the smoother it felt. It was a slow build, but definitely felt like getting stronger.
And what's really encouraging, Alex, is that research suggests even short, focused workouts make a difference. You don't necessarily need hour-long, intense conversations every single day.
Oh, really? So small amounts count?
Yes. Even dedicating just, say, 10 or 15 minutes a day specifically to active speaking practice can lead to noticeable progress over the long run. Consistency is key.
Okay, that's good to know. It makes it seem less daunting. So just passively listening to us now, while helpful for understanding, it's like watching someone else work out.
Exactly. It's not engaging your speaking muscles. You have to be the one doing the lifting, or in this case, the talking, to get the benefit for your own fluency.
Right. And just like at the gym, you're probably going to stumble sometimes, right? You might drop a weight, metaphorically speaking, use the wrong word, make a grammar mistake.
Inevitably. And it's so important to change how you think about those moments. They're not failures. They're just part of the training. You learn from the mistake, you adjust your technique, and you try again.
Like an athlete starting with lighter weights and gradually increasing the challenge as they get stronger, you don't start with the heaviest thing on day one.
Perfect analogy. Start where you are, build gradually. And the most important thing really is consistency over intensity, maybe.
Yeah, like showing up regularly is better than one massive session once a month.
Definitely. Those consistent, even short daily bursts of active speaking, 10, 15 minutes, they really add up over time and make a tangible difference to your fluency.
So instead of aiming for instant perfection, maybe set smaller, achievable goals, like you would with fitness. Today, I'll try to describe my commute in English, or I'll summarize this news story out loud.
Absolutely. Small, manageable goals are much more sustainable. And tracking your progress can be really motivating too. Like, maybe keep a little note, a speech diary.
A speech diary, like a workout log. Practice speaking for 15 minutes today, talked about my weekend.
Exactly. You can look back and see your consistency, see the effort you're putting in. It helps you appreciate how far you've come.
That's a great idea. What about warming up? You know, like stretching before exercise. Any quick ways to warm up your voice or brain before speaking English?
Yeah, a little warm-up can definitely help. It could be as simple as reading a short paragraph aloud in English for a minute or two. Just gets your mouth moving, gets your brain switched into English mode.
Were those tongue twisters?
Tongue twisters are great. They help with articulation and just getting the muscles coordinated. She sells seashells by the seashore.
Good luck with that one. But yeah, I see the point. And presumably, as you do these regular workouts, the confidence builds and that anxiety you feel before speaking starts to lessen.
It really does. Consistent practice helps build what we call muscle memory. And that's not just the physical muscles, but also the mental pathways. Forming sentences, finding words, even pronunciation becomes more automatic, less conscious effort.
Okay, so recapping the gym idea. Treat speaking like training. Regular, consistent practice, even short sessions, is essential to build those speaking muscles and improve fluency. Don't just watch others work out. Do the work yourself.
Exactly. Now that leads us nicely into another major hurdle, something closely related to that practice anxiety we mentioned, the fear of actually talking to native English speakers.
Ah, yes. The big one for many people. That sudden wave of self-consciousness, maybe your mind goes blank when you have to speak to someone whose first language is English.
It's incredibly common and totally understandable. People worry, don't they, about being judged for mistakes in grammar or pronunciation.
Yeah, or will they understand me? Or even, that little fear that they might be critical, or maybe even laugh.
I remember when I was learning other languages, I definitely had moments where I imagined every native speaker was like a walking dictionary and grammar checker just waiting for me to slip up.
Me too. It felt like they had impossibly high standards. You must have seen this fear a lot with learners you've worked with and maybe felt it yourself.
Oh, absolutely, Alex. I think pretty much every learner goes through this phase. You build up this mental image of native speakers as being super critical or impatient. You worry they won't understand or won't want to make the effort.
Yeah. Is that actually true most of the time? Are native speakers really that harsh?
Well, actually, most research on this and just general experience suggests the opposite. The vast majority of native speakers, especially those used to interacting with learners, are actually pretty understanding.
Really?
Yeah. They generally get that learning a language is hard and that mistakes are normal. Often they're quite supportive and just appreciate that you're making the effort to communicate in their language.
That's genuinely reassuring. So maybe those negative reactions we worry about are often just, in our own heads, a projection of our own insecurities.
Very often, yes. Our own fear of judgment can make us imagine the worst. It's really important to try and challenge those negative thoughts and remember that most interactions are likely to be neutral or even positive.
Okay, so how do you start challenging that? What practical things can learners do to get over this fear of speaking with native speakers?
Well, first, you have to consciously try to ignore that inner critic, the voice saying, you'll mess up, they'll laugh. Focus instead on your goal, communicating your message. And keep reminding yourself, mistakes are not failures, they're learning opportunities.
Right. Reframe the mistakes. And maybe find supportive people to practice with.
Definitely. Connecting with other learners who get it, who are going through the same thing, can be great. Or finding patient native speakers, maybe through language exchange programs, who are happy to chat and know that errors are part of the deal.
Creating that safe space to practice where it's okay not to be perfect.
Exactly. And try to shift your perspective. Instead of seeing every chat with a native speaker as a high-stakes test, see it as a chance to learn, a chance to get real-world practice, hear authentic language, and just get more comfortable. Every interaction is data.
Good point. And teachers, of course, expect mistakes. That's their job, to help you through them.
Absolutely. And language exchange partners, as you mentioned, are often fantastic because there's that mutual understanding. You're both learners, helping each other out, light pressure.
What about right in the moment, though? When the anxiety hits just before you have to speak? Any quick fixes?
Simple things can help, like taking a few slow, deep breaths. It sounds cliche, but it genuinely helps calm your nervous system.
Okay, deep breaths.
Or mentally rehearsing a couple of opening lines or the main points you want to make. Just feeling slightly more prepared can reduce that deer in headlights feeling.
Yeah, having a starting point. And maybe starting small. Don't jump into a deep philosophical debate straight away.
Exactly. Start with shorter, simpler interactions. Asking for directions, ordering food, a quick comment about the weather. Build confidence with those small successes. Then gradually try longer conversations.
Step by step. Makes sense.
It's all about gradually expanding your comfort zone. Overcoming that fear is a huge step towards fluency. And having supportive people around you makes a massive difference.
Okay, great advice. So we've covered passive versus active skills, the need for practice like a workout, and tackling the fear of native speakers. What's next? Another big blocker.
Yes, another really significant factor that can stop people from speaking freely. Perfectionism.
Ah, perfectionism. The enemy of good enough.
Exactly. It can be a real roadblock when learning to speak English.
So what does perfectionism look like specifically in language learning? How does it manifest?
Well, it's basically that feeling that you need everything to be perfect before you even open your mouth. Flawless grammar, perfect pronunciation, the most impressive vocabulary.
Right, setting the bar impossibly high for yourself from the start.
It comes from this belief, often unconscious, that any mistake is unacceptable, that you have to sound like a native speaker or close to it right away.
And I can easily see how that would just stop you from speaking at all. If you're constantly monitoring yourself for tiny errors.
It's paralyzing. You become so focused on how you're saying things, the technical accuracy, that you forget what you're trying to say. The main goal, communication, gets lost.
I know, I definitely went through a phase like that. Trying so hard to get every sentence grammatically perfect. It just made me pause all the time.
Yeah, it slows you right down.
It made conversations feel really clunky and unnatural and honestly exhausting.
And Nina, you mentioned earlier about sometimes just staying silent because of that fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
That's perfectionism in action too, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, Alex. That fear of sounding wrong or stupid can lead you to just opt out. Choose silence because it feels safer than risking imperfection. But, like we said, that means missing crucial practice.
So we really need to keep reminding ourselves, language is for communication, connecting with people, sharing ideas. It's not an exam where you need 100%.
Seriously, you have to give yourself permission to be imperfect, to speak up even when you know you might make mistakes. Because again, those mistakes, they're how you learn.
So shift the focus. Instead of, is my grammar perfect? Maybe ask, am I getting my message across? Exactly. Focus on conveying meaning. Most people you talk to will understand you just fine, even with a few small errors. They're usually more interested in your ideas, your story, than in analyzing your verb tenses.
That's a really important point. And let's be honest, even native speakers aren't perfect.
Not even close. Think about how often native English speakers use slang a bit awkwardly, or make little grammatical slips, or stumble over words. It happens constantly in natural conversation.
Yeah, we mispronounce things, use and It's normal. It doesn't stop communication.
Exactly. So why hold ourselves as learners to a standard that even native speakers don't always meet?
Good question. So what practical things can help someone break free from that perfectionist trap and just speak more?
Well, exercises where the goal is fluency over accuracy can help. Like, try telling a story or describing something you did and make a rule not to stop and correct yourself for minor errors. Just keep talking.
Focus on the flow?
Yes. Or improvisation activities, speaking on a topic with minimal preparation. It forces you to be more spontaneous and less self-critical in the moment.
Getting comfortable with imperfection.
Another really useful thing is recording yourself. Speak naturally. Don't worry too much about perfection while you're recording. Then listen back later, privately.
So you separate the speaking from the analyzing.
Exactly. You can identify areas to work on without the pressure of doing it live. It takes the self-consciousness out of the speaking part itself.
And presumably, just like with the fear of native speakers, simply speaking more often, even with other learners, helps chip away at perfectionism over time.
Absolutely. The more you practice communicating successfully, even imperfectly, the less power that perfectionist voice has. You realize that effective communication is possible without flawless English.
So success comes from doing, from practicing, not from waiting until you feel magically perfect.
That's the key. Perfectionism stops you from starting, stops you from practicing. The goal isn't perfect speech from day one. It's learning to communicate effectively, and that journey involves mistakes. Embrace them.
Embrace the mistakes. Good mantra. Okay, so thinking about our podcast itself now, our guide, the Your English podcast guide, lays out how we structure these deep dives. Maybe we should quickly touch on those points, just to make sure we're hitting the mark for everyone listening.
Yes, Alex, that's a great idea. It's good practice for us, too. So the guide states, first off, that our main aim is to help listeners boost their English, bit by bit with each conversation we have.
Right. Little improvements adding up over time. And I think today, focusing on overcoming speaking barriers definitely fits that. We're giving tools for that gradual improvement.
Mm-hmm. And it also says we, Alex and Nina, should look closely at daily habits that help improve English. Our whole gym analogy for speaking practice today really dives into making it a regular habit.
Yeah, turning practice into a routine. The guide also mentions explaining why learning English is necessary. While today was more how-to, the underlying reason is always effective communication in a global language, which is pretty necessary.
True. And a really important point in the guide is about our language keeping it simple, accessible for beginners. We do try hard to explain things clearly without overly complex jargon. Right?
We definitely try. Hope we succeed most of the time. The guide also reminds us to encourage subscriptions. So, just a quick reminder, if you're finding this helpful, please do subscribe to your English podcast so you don't miss future deep dives.
Good point. And it also mentions asking listeners questions or inviting feedback. We genuinely love hearing from you, comments, suggestions, your own experiences. It all helps us make the podcast better.
Absolutely. And finally, the guide says we should always thank you, the audience, for listening at the end, which we will, of course, do very shortly. It's useful to revisit these points, isn't it? Keeps us on track.
It really does. Ensures we're focused on delivering what we set out to do, helping you improve your English in a clear, practical way.
Okay, so let's wrap things up for today. Just a quick summary of the main things we've talked about in this deep dive.
We started with that key difference between passive understanding and active speaking, highlighting that speaking needs specific active practice.
Right. Then we looked at the common issue of translating word for word in your head and how that can slow you down and sound unnatural.
Mm-hmm. And we spent a good chunk of time on the importance of consistent speaking practice. Using that gym workout analogy, you got to train those language muscles.
We did. Then we tackled the fear of speaking with native speakers, offering ways to manage that anxiety, and remembering most people are supportive.
And finally, we discussed perfectionism, how striving for impossible perfection stops you from speaking, and why focusing on communication over flawless accuracy is so important.
So the big takeaway message, really, if there's one thing, is that if you want to speak English more fluently and more confidently, you just have to speak more.
Yes. Make it a regular thing. Practice often. And crucially, don't let that fear of making mistakes paralyze you. Every single conversation, even a short one, is a step forward. It's a chance to learn.
Absolutely. My own journey, it was definitely about pushing through that initial discomfort, accepting I wouldn't be perfect, and just doing it regularly. That made all the difference to my confidence and skills over time.
Same here with other languages I've learned. Moving from hesitation to feeling more comfortable speaking really came down to consistent effort, being okay with making mistakes, and stepping outside that comfort zone again and again.
So we really encourage you to set those small, manageable goals for daily speaking. Like we said, describe your day, summarize something you read or watched, anything.
And use technology. Record yourself. Listen back without judgment, just for information. Look for online language clubs or exchange partners. Find ways to practice that work for you.
The most important step is just starting. Start speaking now, wherever you are. Don't wait until you feel ready, because that day might never come if you don't practice.
Exactly. And remember, progress isn't always a straight line. There will be ups and downs. Be patient with yourself. Keep at it. Consistency is everything.
Share your journey too. Connect with other learners. Celebrate the small wins. Every sentence spoken is progress.
And please do subscribe if you haven't. Leave us comments, share your thoughts. We really value your input.
Because honestly, by continuing to practice, by refusing to let the fear of mistakes win, you really will improve your spoken English significantly. You'll unlock so much more communication.
Absolutely. So, as Alex summed it up so well earlier,
remember, speak stumble, learn, and grow.
Thank you all so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We wish you the very best as you continue on your journey to speaking English more fluently and confidently.